Here we go.
Right.
Chapter 37. This chapter is going to address a continuation of the previous theme. And remember the crucial phrase, Dira betachtenim, a welcoming place in the naturally least evident or least indigenously receptive area to Hashem. And it's going to address a basic frustrating question, which is, why is the godly soul compelled to be entangled with the animal soul and the body? In a standard battle, each side draws up its territory and they go at it, but they then have a home base. There's a separate place for each one. So why can't there be a separate place for the godly soul independent of the animal soul and not have to always be dealing with the animal soul? Why are they compelled to constantly be intertwined? Even the Beinoni, which is kind of an aspiration more than it is a genuine expectation, is still having to deal with the animal soul. So although we understand the value of the victory of the godly soul, the essential question is, why is there this inseparability? And our answer is not that that's some sort of nuisance or some sort of programming flaw. This is essentially the purpose for which Hashem created the world, to find the word acceptance is not strong enough, welcomingness in the least naturally evident places that godliness would be expected to be in. Now, this is what we talked about in the previous chapter a lot, Dir B'Tachtenim, such a central theme, of course. The new point of this parak is that the transformation of the physical into the spiritual is not miraculous. It's the natural outgrowth of our behavior. Now, we talked about this yesterday when I substitute taught Chaya's Shabbos class, and we're talking about the coming of Mashiach. And we understand, I mean, it is a complete circle. We know that the Baal Shem Tov asked Mashiach, when are you coming? And he said, when the well springs of your teachings are spread to the outside. So it's not just a random reward that if you'll learn a lot of Chassidus, then Mashiach will come. There is a natural consequence. There's a cause-effect of learning Chassidus and pursuing the objectives as directed by Chassidus and the coming of Mashiach. As we explained, and again, there are, I mean, to be sort of the full understanding, there are other perspectives, but the perspective that Chassidus takes as to why or what it is that we are shooting for with Mashiach is the fulfillment of Hashem's plan that God should be welcomed in this world. So, for example, the Rambam, Maimonides, who's the only codifier who speaks about the halachic parameters and consequences of Mashiach, says that when Mashiach will come, it will not require miracles. It is a natural outgrowth of human achievement that will result in the absence of war and you have to lose in order for me to win type of unhealthy competition. We don't mean we're not going to play chess anymore. We mean this sort of vicious, cutthroat mentality, et cetera, et cetera. That, again, may certainly sound to us like it's a miracle. And yet we understand that this is within human capacity to achieve. It doesn't require a violation of the laws of nature for us to reach that. And this is essentially what we're shooting for. So again, it's probably not really a Jewish perspective, but there is a global perspective that somehow godliness is associated with miracles, so that if the doctor can administer medication and the person can get better, that is somehow, again, this is not a Torah perspective, that is somehow not seen as being a sign of Hashem. Oh, that's the doctor did that. If the guy falls 40 stories and he lands on his feet and walks away, then we say, oh, that's a miracle. That's godliness. And that bifurcation is what we're trying to overcome. We're trying to not separate out and say, well, that's natural and that's godly. We're trying to see them as intertwined. Perhaps another way of phrasing it is, in the global perspective, we see nature as being a virtue, because the alternative to nature is sort of plastic and phony and so on. So if something exists in the world of nature, we appreciate a beauty there. Torah says there's something even more beautiful than nature, and that's the supernatural. That is, that we take nature and we expose its innate godliness. So rather than seeing the world and nature as being in conflict with godliness, and I win, you lose, that is, we have to destroy nature in order to expose, or in order to make godliness welcome, and therefore we have to eschew logic and science and rationale. Torah says that the two should be in perfect functional harmony. And we've probably all heard this, the perception that somehow Torah is opposed to science, or Torah is opposed to rationale, etc. And our counter argument is quite the contrary. Science is a mechanism through which we can appreciate the infinite godliness. And that's the greater objective, not to destroy my enemy, so to speak, but to evoke the common theme within the two of them. And this is the objective of why the godly soul must be intertwined with the animal soul. I told this story in Shul, but I'll share it here again. Rabbi Label Shapiro, who is the Rosh Hashiva and the Rav of the Chabad community in Miami, so back like in the 70s, he used to travel to Russia and, would meet with the people and bring them supplies and so on. And one of the reasons why he was the proper man for the job was because there were a lot of complex halachic issues that would come up in these circumstances that he would try to give the people direction on. And one time, different times he visited, there were different degrees of how welcomed he was and where he was allowed to go. But one time he actually was permitted to visit a man who was in jail, refuseniks, it sounds like ancient history, but we remember. So he's going to visit the man. He's thinking, what could I possibly say to this man? This is not like a nice U.S. jail where Rabbi Shimon brings you pastrami sandwich. This is a Soviet jail. I mean, the guy's in jail. So he visits him, and the guy says to him, I have only one question. So he's thinking, oh no, what's he going to ask me? Why would God do this to him? And what am I going to say? The guy says, I just want to know, why did God make it so logical that God exists? Why didn't he make it that you had to suspend logic in order to know God? So he's like, amazed. This is what the guy's worried about, in a prison. But what is the answer? I mean, the question is itself a lesson, but what is the answer to that? Because if we had to suspend our logic in order to be connected with Hashem, then that aspect of our personality would not be involved in our relationship with Hashem. Then our relationship with Hashem would be limited. It would not include our capacity for intellect. And then it wouldn't be a dir b'tachtonim. We'd say, well, when it comes to intellect, God is not welcome. Like people say, this is the real world. God is not welcome here. God's welcome everywhere but here. And that's what we're trying to overcome. And we can imagine this in an interpersonal relationship. There are boundaries we set up in our homes, and we can have very close friends and so on. But family is welcome in certain areas that other people are not welcome in. But Hashem wants to be welcomed. He wants to be welcomed in every aspect of our personal existence and globally as well. And that's why the godly soul is constantly and must be intertwined with the animal soul. Now, what is the most profound method through which we welcome Hashem into our world is through mitzvah performance. Now, herein, as we'll see a little bit later on in the parak, this is a long parak, by the way. Just as an illustration, this chapter 37 is 9 days of the daily Tanya. The chitas, as we call it. And if you have the lessons in Tanya and you see in the margin there are dates, you'll note that this chapter takes 9 days. Because it's very long. It's like 5 pages or so. It's a very long chapter. And, like I say, hopefully about every chapter and every word, this is the whole message of Tanya, contained in this chapter. So we'll see a little bit later on, the Alter Rebbe is going to raise, I'll call it a little bit of, I'll say tension, maybe that's a little melodramatic, between two different perspectives that we have in the world of holiness. We're talking about within the world of commitment to Hashem. And it's not one and not the other, but primacy is really where the emphasis is. And this has always historically been the distinction amongst all the different approaches, I'll call it, within Torah, from communal to Hasidic and Yeshivish and Litvish and Sephardim and so on. Nobody disagrees on the value. The question is, where is the emphasis placed? So there is one of those tensions is between mitzvah action and Torah study. Now, nobody's against either one of them. The question is, or the sort of fulcrum of this teeter-totter is, where do we put the primacy? Now, it will not surprise you that in Hasidus, it's put on the action. If there's one quote we heard more than any from the Rebbe, it's a paraphrase of Pirkei Avos that the Rebbe referred to as Hamaisa hu ha'ikar. The deed is the essential. The full quote is Lo ha'medrash ikar al ha'maisa. It is not the analysis that is primary, but the deed. And then the Rebbe would just summarize that Hamaisa hu ha'ikar. The main thing is the deed. Get it done. Do the mitzvah. And the classic Chabad, are you Jewish? Yes. Light Shabbos candles, shake the lulav and esrog, eat the matzah, put up the mezuzah. Why don't we say, are you Jewish? Yes, let me give you a Dvar Torah. And again, I'm not, God forbid, diminishing that. And there are people who do that. Maybe you've been accosted, and I mean that jokingly, at the grocery store at Kol Tuv, and they say, hey, you want to hear a Dvar Torah? Why not? So again, it's not one and not the other. The emphasis is on the mechanical execution of mitzvahs. Why? Because of this theme, that when we engage our humanity, for example, we eat matzah, we literally engage our biology in the consumption of matzah and its absorption within the bloodstream, et cetera, whatever the biology is, we have now transformed the entire digestive system into a dwelling place for godliness. And of course, the godly soul can't eat matzah. It needs to have the body. Now, we'll get to this a little bit later, but just to sort of finish this thought up here, and then we won't get to it today. It's well on in the chapter. There is also that characteristic that exists to some degree with Torah study. I mean, I'm not here to study brain science, but the synapses and so on. The lesser physicality of Torah study is why mitzvah observance is that much more profound. And to add another little nuance to that, it's why we encourage, almost perhaps even to the point of requiring, the verbalization of Torah study. And this is a classic distinction. In the library, the rule of thumb is everybody should be totally still. And in the yeshiva, the rule of thumb is quite the opposite. They are encouraged to enunciate the words, and it's very loud. And people who are not accustomed to that, who walk into a yeshiva and see 50, 80 students, sometimes even raising their voices and shouting, find it very odd. It's not what they think of as study hall, where people are quiet and maybe ask a question in hushed undertones. And that's not just a pedagogic strategy as to which one is more effective. It's the idea that in order for us to be welcoming of the infinity of Hashem into our existence, we need to engage our skeleton, our humanity, our physical body, and that therefore enunciating the words brings that physicality to the Torah study. So again, it may seem so incredibly obvious to us because it's so essential to Hasidus. And what the Alter Rebbe, because of what we're learning here in these chapters of Tanya, there is another perspective that exists out there in the world, and I'm talking about the world of Kedusha. I'm not talking about people who are not interested in holiness. In the world of Kedusha, there is that perspective that presents that anything that's physical is busy work or nuisance or something to do so that we don't ruin the world, or some concession to the weakness of our humanity that, oh, I guess we got to eat. But it's really essentially a bother till I get back to what's more important. Now, again, I'm certainly exaggerating to illustrate the point, but this is what's so what I'm looking for central to this message of Hasidus taken from this chapter. Okay, Perek Lamed Zayin. So we see this chapter, we always like to look at the first letter. It is a Vav, which indicates that it's a continuation of the theme of Dira B'Tachtonim. I really want to overemphasize that phrase, Dira B'Tachtonim, a dwelling place in the non-naturally welcoming areas of existence. Tacless Hashlaimus. We talked about this word before. Tacless. The emphasis of Tacless means it's beyond anything else that could be of Shleimus. That includes creation. That, and again, the word Tacless meaning the end. It's like the word kala, which means to complete. It could even mean to expire. It is the ultimate objective. So it is, I don't know, it's not competitive. So I'm tempted to say the word greater, but that's a little shallow. It's not better. It's not a competitive thing. It's the tachlis, the ultimate purpose, more than creation, more than the giving of the Torah. All of our activities, the Tacless Hashlaimus, Hazeh, Shleimus HaMashiach V'Tchias HaMeisim, of the times of Mashiach, when Mashiach, the person, inspires, uplifts, guides, kickstarts the people to an overwhelming awareness of Hashem, that manifests itself in the ultimate breakdown, in a positive sense, of the barrier between the physical and the spiritual. The ultimate breakdown that shows the battle, perhaps, of the physical and the spiritual, which is what we're trying to overcome, not by destroying the physical, is death. I mean, Nishtagedach, as we say, when the time comes and a person passes, the physical has defeated the spiritual, because the spiritual lives on forever and the physical expires. So when somebody is described as having passed, we say that the physical dominated the spiritual. The physical defeated the spiritual. When we'll have a time when the physical and the spiritual will no longer be in competition, so then the spiritual will uplift the physical. Just as the spiritual lives forever, so will the physical live forever within that. The spiritual will take the lead, I guess, from the spiritual. Shehu, which is Gila Yorin Seif Baruch Hu Be'elam Hazeh Hagashmi, which is the total revelation of Hashem in this world. Toloi is linked, but my seinu v'avadesenu kolzman meshach hagolus, to our deeds and our service. Two different words. Our deeds, which represents iskafia. Remember these two words, iskafia and ishapcha. Iskafia is an Aramaic form of the word that means literally to bend. The word kaf, which is the root word there, is the word for the hand because it bends. It's also the word for a spoon that has sort of that curvature. And the idea is I push back against my impulse. So my impulse is to sit on the couch. And I have iskafia by doing my maisa, and I get up and I shake the lulav. I get up and I eat the matzah. And then the more profound level is the level called avoida. Avoida, we know, is when I go and I overcome, I transform. It's like the word, we translate it as service or work. In this context, work is better. And the most profound illustration is working with leather. You may recall this from earlier discussions. If you think about a cow, we've all seen a cow, and then how do they turn that into the soft leather that we make shoes from? That doesn't happen inevitably. That requires enormous labor to transform the cow skin into the soft leather that you make shoes from. So that is a transformation. That brings about something that is not going to happen inevitably. Yes, life is difficult, but a 5-year-old becomes a 6-year-old or on an escalator. Avoida represents leaps and bounds. So the days of Mashiach is Maisa. That is a sort of inevitability, meaning every day we're getting better. And as we alluded to before, that doesn't require a violation of nature. Bringing Mashiach is not in violation of the natural progression. We have the capacity to feed the world. We need to have the spiritual transformation to be more serving versus greedy, and then we can feed everybody, etc. Tchias hamesim is not something that we can accomplish within the parameters as they are currently laid out. That requires this transformation. It is so it is linked with our mitzvahs. Why? Ki hagerim schar hamitzvah hi a mitzvah ba'atzma. Because what causes the consequence of mitzvah, and this is again a classic concept in Torah, like Maimonides describes it in his Principles of Faith. One of the essential principles is we believe in consequence. Now, when you say consequence in English, it usually sounds like something unpleasant, but it's also pleasant. You know, if you jog every day, you'll be healthier. If you don't eat candy, you're less likely to get cavities. So the mitzvah, the impact of a mitzvah, the consequence of a mitzvah is from the mitzvah itself. So when we do a mitzvah, take a simple mitzvah, a person eats matzah on Pesach, shakes the lulav, learns Torah, whatever it is, they are putting aside their natural proclivity to be concerned only with themselves, and they are making a deliberate choice to do something in the service of Hashem. When they do this, they transform their physical body from a sense of being that is no different, again, it's a little harsh, but than an animal. An animal just lives every day the same. There is no difference. And an animal only lives for its own survival. When a human being overcomes his animalistic impulse, which is essentially what's the least amount I got to do and get what I want, and then maybe the person wants so much that they have to work very hard, but it's all motivated by what do I got to do to get what I want versus what is it that is expected of me. And you may recall the quote we learned about 100 to 101, that even for doing just 1% more, the transformation is 100% more than just doing the standard. And again, it's about this idea. So when we do a mitzvah, it's not only that there is some spiritual consequence, it is even a somewhat logical consequence. The more we overcome our impulse, which is essentially still to do nothing. You know, object at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon. So what motivates us to act? One thing that can motivate us to act is selfishness. Since I want to eat, I have to get up and get a job so I can pay for things. Now, if you think about, again, in the broader scope, this is essentially the ethos of the secular world. Now, again, maybe I'm being overly harsh, but I think it illustrates an important point. It's that sort of classic lecture that parents sometimes fall into when they see the child being lazy. Don't you want to grow up and have a house and a car and material things? Well, you got to get a job. And the only way to get a job is to go to school. And you got to go to school and work hard and go to college and go to med school. And then you'll be able to have those material things that you need. It doesn't even have to be grotesque. It just, so the kid goes to school. What's the point of going to school? Because you go to school, you get a job. What's the point of getting a job? You get a job, you have money. What's the point of having money? You buy things. What's the point of buying things? What do you mean? That is the point. So that is essentially no different than an animal. Again, that sounds very harsh, but why does the animal get up and go and hunt and so on? Because it wants to eat. If you ever been to the zoo and you see the lazy lion just sitting there, sure, he has no reason to do anything other than sit there because they're feeding him. So he sits there. Now, the alternative is this idea. Why do we do whatever it is that we do physically, whether it's eating bread and water and sleeping on the floor, or it's complete material abundance, it's in the service of Hashem. So on the one hand, that's great. That means we can eat chocolate because we're serving Hashem. On the other hand, it means that we got to be consciously serving Hashem at every moment. See, if we just made it like a scale, we say, look, as long as you only eat bread and glass of water, you're fine because you're denying yourself chocolate. So we say, fine, now it's very simple. Maybe I don't have so much fun in my life, but I know it's very simple. Now we're saying, no, I don't care if you only eat bread and water. This guy eats bread and water, and he's a selfish, self-serving, and this guy eats chocolate, and he's serving Hashem. What is the objective? What is that awareness? Now, when we can hopefully get ourselves to that kind of awareness, this is essentially what it means that we bring awareness of Hashem into every aspect of our existence, and by extension to the entire world, and that's Mashiach. Meaning we make the world so receptive to godliness. That's why Mashiach comes, not just to fix everything. We've talked about this in other contexts as well. And again, in the shameless cross-promotion for the Shabbos class, this is what we talked about, how sort of the Chiddush innovation of the Rebbe used to be that Mashiach was seen as coming to fix everything. Things are so terrible that Mashiach will come because we're desperate, which, there is a truth to that. He comes on the donkey. The Rebbe sort of reworked the script. I'm not a Rebbe, so I don't know why, but it's certainly much more appealing to our American sense that, thank God, life is functional. That Mashiach is coming not because that things are so bad. Mashiach is coming because things are so good. And this is essentially what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. When we flip the script, not only is it true for us and true for our family and immediate surroundings, by extension, it becomes the whole world. And this is what welcomes godliness into the world. Ki basiyasa, when we do a mitzvah, and again, consciously, we bring down godliness into the world, meaning everybody else. This is like a classic thing. We have a rule. We call it a chassid creates an atmosphere. That means when all the kids are sitting around and somebody starts a conversation that's inappropriate, they start, lashon hara, whatever it is, take a simple example, and somebody else jumps in and somehow manages to redirect the conversation to a characteristic of holiness. They become that leader that we always talk about. The Rebbe's not interested in followers, interested in leaders. We all of a sudden can bring godliness into that environment. Tacless Shem called dvarim hatahirim mutorim shenasis behem ha-mitzvah maisius kegoin klaf hatfilin umezuzah v'sefer Torah. What happens when we manage to engage with a physical item? That is something that is innately permitted. And the simplest example is food. When a person eats, we don't innately think of that as serving Hashem. We tend to eat because we're hungry. But again, in that moment, how are we really different than an animal? It also eats when it's hungry. What we do, or what we have the opportunity to do, is to transform that activity into a godly activity, because when we consciously include godliness into it. Now, again, to use somewhat of a simplistic and certainly imperfect analogy, it's the first day of school, and there's the new kid, and everyone else is sitting around and eating lunch, and that kid is also eating lunch. So you say, what are those 5 kids doing? They're eating lunch. What is that kid sitting by himself doing? Eating lunch. Everyone's eating lunch. What's the difference? Now imagine one of the kids will turn to the new kid and say, you want to eat your lunch sitting next to us? So that kid's whole life has been changed. Why? He's eating the same sandwich he was eating before. What's the difference? They have now brought awareness of this child who was in the room but not being identified, not being recognized, is now been recognized. He's still eating his lunch. He's doing the same action he was doing before. So they transformed a circumstance where there was an opportunity. They could have, quote unquote, done nothing. And then you say, what did you do? We ate lunch. What did you do? We ate lunch. That is, they spiritualized the circumstance. Now, I'll tell you this, if you promise not to tell on me. In the world of fundraising, don't tell on me, because I'm not supposed to tell non-fundraisers. How is a Chabad shliach supposed to raise money when he's competing with the hospital? The hospital is going to offer this guy a better dinner. He's going to offer him a more famous appeal. He's going to offer him more publicity. He's going to get him to shake hands with bigger machers and take him to better baseball games. How are you ever going to compete with him? It's impossible. You'll never compete with him unless you spiritualize the relationship. That means you bring him for Shabbos, because the hospital can't bring him for Shabbos. You put tefillin on with him. Rabbi Shmuel David Reichik, Olav Shalom, who was one of the great Hasidim of the previous generation, the Frierdiker Rebbe sent him to Los Angeles in the 40s. And here was a man who helped Jews escape from Russia, lived in suffering and so on. He finally makes it to America, and they send him off to Los Angeles. And he began Chabad in Los Angeles in the 40s. So he would come to people, and, like anyone, he had to raise money. Later in life, him and Reb Mendel Futterfass, they used to come to Chicago. They would go around to raise money for Eretz Yisrael. One time, he came to a certain man, and like always, Rabbi Reichik brought tefillin, and he put on tefillin with him. And then they finished, and they left. The guy comes, says, "Rabbi, you forgot the check." He says, "For 20 years, rabbis come, they ask me for a check. They don't ask me for tefillin. You came for tefillin. You forgot the check." So if we will spiritualize the kid in the lunchroom, if we will spiritualize our relationships, and of course, I don't mean this in some sort of dishonest manner. That is, we will include Hashem like you include that child. It's like Hashem is that kid. He's in the lunchroom. He's there. He could come over and say, "Can I sit here?" But then he's sort of forcing his way in. And if we will reach out and say, "We want you to participate. We want Hashem to be in our physical behaviors," etc. Now, where is Hashem welcome? What if the kids are all sitting around, just to take that analogy another step further, and they're all participating in something inappropriate, and then they say, "Hey, kid, you want to come here?" Why? Because it's a form of legitimizing. You see, we're not scoundrels. This is why we have, for example, in Pirkei Avos, there's a very odd story. A man says, "I was once traveling in the road, and I met a man, and he said to me, 'Where are you from?' And he said, 'I'm from a city of scholars and Torah and so on.' So the man said to me, 'Rebbe, if you will come to my town, I will give you gold and silver and jewelry.'" You may recognize this quote from Pirkei Avos. And the man responded, "Even if you'll give me all the gold and silver in the world, I will only live in a place of Torah." I don't know if people recognize this. It's a mission in Pirkei Avos. So we asked the question, this is the whole shlikas. Meaning, what do you mean? The guy's offering to fund your Chabad house. Come, he's gonna fund the whole thing. Why aren't you doing it? So it's an interesting question. So we explained, because what did the guy say to him? The guy didn't say he would study Torah with him. The guy didn't say he would. He says, "I want to have a scholar. I want to set up a scholar." Why? Because it's an offset to my misbehavior. Why do we find that certain scoundrels were big supporters of the arts and academia? Why? Because it's an offset. You see, I'm not a bad guy. Look who I invite on my private plane and jet. No relation. Alan Dirch, whatever. These scoundrels will support the arts and so on, because it's saying, see, it legitimizes my behavior. Because look what I do with it. It all goes to tzedakah and so on. So if the behavior is an ungodly behavior, God is not going to be welcome there, no matter what. But if the behavior, the kids are sitting around eating lunch in a healthy, friendly manner, think about how transformative it is when they turn to the kid who's not naturally part of that group, and take the analogy as far along as you'd like, and they say, "Come, be part of our group. We want to include you." They brought godliness into the world. If they're doing something bad, they want to include them because that will make us feel better about ourselves. We're not such bad guys that we that we won't include somebody. He's not welcome. Yes, but you have to unmute.
I'm so glad you explained that, because I never understood that Pirkei Avos, but does that mean that we just I understand the concept, that those people are bad. They just want you sitting there so it looks like what they're doing is good and they're adding it in. But are we just giving up on those people? Because we're not building a Chabad house there. So
this is it's a very
I really hate
difficult
for the Chabad.
strategy, because when people follow through on that and they, so to speak, fall for it, it always blows up in their face. Hey, you want to come on my private jet? It's going to always blow up in their face. Again, I don't want to get overly distracted, but there's this, we're living through this right now. So this guy, Jeffrey Epstein, no relation, he used to invite Alan Dershowitz. See, I'm not a scoundrel. Look, I invite this guy, scholars. I love scholarship. I love the arts and so on. It always blows up. So it's something you got to be very, very cautious about. And again, there's grooming, familiar with this idea. So there's grooming for all forms of abuse. Hey, want to come on my private plane? I'll take you to, someplace exciting. I'll take you to the Super Bowl. And then somehow they want to sell you something that's illegal or etc., because it becomes a cover. So the only way, back into our context here, the only way through which we can welcome the infinity of Hashem is when our behavior is essentially at least tolerable. So the kids are sitting around at lunch, doesn't mean they're only studying Hasidus. They may be talking about, their favorite sports, but it's a klipas noga. It's not obviously godly, but it's not antagonistic to godliness. So when they say, hey, new kid, you want to join us? They have brought godliness into it. However, if they're sitting around doing criminal behavior, and then they want to say, hey, let's bring God in here because, again, whether it's conscious or not, this will make us feel better about ourselves, or we'll put on the veneer that we're not such bad guys, we're really legit people. No, Hashem is not, so to speak, falling for that one. So here the Alter Rebbe says, the examples being using physical objects like wool to make tzitzis, parchment to make tefillin or mezuzahs or a Torah. Like it says, though, the only thing that is eligible for godliness to be brought into the world is things that are permissible to be eaten. Now, there's a halachic nuance here that's worth pointing out just for a moment. Halachically, a Torah, tefillin, what's called stam, that's the way to remember it, Sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzah, stam, is only permitted to use a kosher species of animal. So it has to be a cow or goat or whatever it is to make the parchment for Torah, tefillin, mezuzah. However, just to play this out, it is not required to have been shechted properly, meaning, of course, a cow is not innately or is not definitively going to be permitted to be eaten. It has to be slaughtered properly. It has to be inspected to make sure it has no injury or disease that would have caused it to die, et cetera, et cetera. So the species of cow is eligible, but it doesn't mean it's going to be played out. Now, when it comes, though, to tefillin and mezuzahs, there it's permitted even if the animal itself was not a kosher animal, was not slaughtered according to Jewish law, or it was discovered to have some sort of disease, etc. So there are gradations along the way. There have been times in history where people were meticulous to only use the parchment made from an animal that was in fact fully kosher, saying all through it was slaughtered properly and inspected and found, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not required. V'chein esrog she'eino arla, or another example, an esrog that's not arla. Now, the law of arla is that a tree, any fruit-bearing tree, for the first few years of its fruit-bearing seasons, the fruits may not be eaten. So the esrog, even though you don't eat it, but in order for an esrog to be permitted to be used as an esrog, it must be, I'm going to use the word edible, but I don't mean taste-wise. I mean halachically eatable, permitted to be eaten, even though, of course, you don't eat the esrog. So the halacha is that if an esrog comes from a tree that was within the first few years, what's called arla, that esrog is not acceptable for use as the mitzvah of esrog. Now this really becomes interesting. What about money that's not been stolen? Now that seems rather obvious. However, let's play it down the road. We know that the distinctive characteristic of money is its fungibility, as illustrated by the law. If I lend you my lawnmower, you must give me back my lawnmower. You can't say, well, here I got a different lawnmower. You have to give me back my lawnmower. If I lend you $10, I don't expect you to give me back that $10 bill. That's the whole nature of money. You spend that, and then a week later, you give me 2 5s. So when we say money that's not been stolen, so does that mean if I go and I literally, God forbid, you take someone's purse and then you take the cash and put it in the pushka? We're not just talking about that. What if the person commits some sort of other financial crime? Is that the stolen money? Meaning it's not even the physical object. Where's the stolen money? The person has $90 of legitimate money and $10 of illegitimate money. So what is considered the quote unquote stolen money? But this is the idea. Once it gets mixed in, now Hashem is not welcome there. And no matter how much we're going to say, yeah, but Hashem is not welcome there. So it's not just that we find it repulsive. Hashem is not welcome there. Again, just like the kids who are sitting around doing something bad and then they want to invite the new kid in, either because they want to legitimize themselves, because the more people that I spread it out amongst, the less badly I feel about myself because everybody was doing it, or I want to put a veneer of virtue on my behavior by including the new kid, or I want to corrupt him, whatever it may be. So Hashem is not just so to speak. Hashem is not buying that, and he's not allowing himself in. So here we have sort of all of the categories. We have the animal. We'll talk about the parchment. We have the vegetable, talking about the esrog. And we have the, what we call mineral, but it's money made from metal, especially in the times of the Alter Rebbe, before they had paper currency, but the same idea, that all three of them are taintable or usable. And that's the characteristic of klipas noigan. I want to do the Haggah, the note, and then we'll back up and talk a little bit of the technical terminology. Arla, which again, remember, is the halacha that prohibits the usage of fruits from the first few years of a tree's fruit-bearing system. He misholish klipas hatmeis lagamre is of the three completely unholy or impure tamei klipas. I'm going to come back to that word in a moment, but I just want to finish the sentence and then we'll come back. Shein lehem aliyah la'olam. They can never be elevated in the service of Hashem. As it says in the Eitz Chaim, v'chein kol mitzvahs haba ba'avera chas v'shalom. So to any mitzvah that comes out of an avera. So let's back up here, a little technical point. Essentially, very broad strokes, we categorize all of existence in basically three groups. Group one is things which are evidently godly, which are basically mitzvah actions. A person fasts on Yom Kippur, godliness is evident. Why else would I do it? A person puts up a mezuzah, it's evidently godly. On the flip side, all the way to the extreme, is something that you can't even imagine that there's godliness in it, although there must be godliness in it, which is basically violations, murder, cheating, lying, idolatry, whatever it may be. It's like, you can't imagine. There's godliness in Tisha B'Av and the destruction. Yeah, we believe it. We sort of take it on faith, but it's like, it's literally unimaginable. And then you have most of life, which is in between, where the godliness is not immediately evident and obvious. However, it is accessible, and the choice is up to us. And when we interact with such an item, we either elevate and highlight better its godliness, or we further push its godliness down. So an example, any permitted item, a pencil, a book, the computer, internet, whatever it may be, is it obviously godly? No. Is it possible that you can use it for godliness? Yes. So when we interact with it, whether it is basic subsistence, bread and water, we are given the opportunity to do to go one of two ways. Either we evoke its godliness by utilizing it for Hashem, as we're doing now with the computer, or, God forbid, we further squash its godliness by piling on and ignoring its godliness and further pushing its godliness away. Now, the terminology, there's two terms. The essential word is two adjectives on the same word. The word is klipa. The word klipa translates as a shell, or maybe even a membrane. There are some that are klipas noga. There's a shell, but there's light that comes through it. That is, even though I look at the desk and I don't see godliness, I can imagine that there's godliness in the desk. I can see the godliness seeping through it if I will utilize it in its proper manner. And then there is the three-plied shell, which is based on a statement in Yecheskel where he said he saw this great drama, and he says, I did not see God in the lightning, I didn't see God in the thunder, I did not see God in the drama, meaning you can't even imagine it, but only in the small, still voice I could see it. And that's where he accessed it. And that's a level of godliness that I can't even imagine exists within this physical item. One illustration perhaps is the difference between, I use this, an orange and a walnut. If you look at an orange, you don't see the fruit of the orange, you see the peel. But by looking at the peel, I can imagine that there's food there. I can even sense, if the peel is discolored, I can get the sense of how fresh it is or spoiled it is, etc. A walnut, if we didn't know, and I gave you a walnut, I would say, how, there's food in this? How could you imagine there's food? The only way to get the food is to crack it. I have to smash the walnut in order to get the fruit, the nut out of it. Whereas the peel, even if I don't eat the peel, but you could imagine I could even eat it. I mean, you could use the peel and eat it. So I don't know if that illustrates the point. So most of life and what we're dealing with, especially in our aspiration to be a Beinoni, is klipa. It's not obviously godly. Noga. There is light filtering through. I can imagine that there's godliness in it. And our opportunity when we interact with it is to evoke that godliness. Like the kid sitting on the side. I see from his body language, he's feeling alone and he'd really like to be included. And I can just sit there and do what I've been doing. I didn't do anything bad. I didn't push him away. I didn't disregard him. I'm doing what I'm doing. Or I can overcome ischafia. I can get out of my chair and go over and say, hi, welcome, come sit with us. And then I have transformed an opportunity and access the godliness. In the world of business, not that I live there, this is one of the core points. Today's opportunity is not coming back tomorrow. You have to seize the opportunity today. Tomorrow will be new opportunities. And this is how our attitude should be with spiritual opportunities. The opportunity to welcome that kid into the lunchroom only comes once, because by tomorrow, I've already established the mold. We're in, you're out, you're the new kid, you're not one of us, you're an outsider. I've established the mold. Yes, we can overcome it. There's always tshuva, etc. But that opportunity is missed. It's gone. We are told that one of the harshest forms of penalty after 120 is to see all the missed opportunities. Imagine a person say, oh, someone told me in 1981 I could have bought stock in Apple for 2 cents, and I could have bought Amazon for 2 cents, and so on. So you didn't do anything bad, you didn't do anything wrong, but missed opportunity. So we should have that same attitude about spiritual opportunity. And then the Alter Rebbe underscores, but it's only when it's klipas noga. But when it's sholish klipas tameis legamre, when it's something that is in violation of godliness, I can never transform that into the service of Hashem. That's called a mitzvah that comes out of a sin. So whereas there may be a temptation to say that I can still do it, it's good enough. Again, this comes down to, is my objective what's going to make me feel good, or is my objective to welcome godliness into the world? And if my objective is to welcome godliness into the world, I have to follow God's instruction. So if I'm having a guest and he says, look, I'm very allergic to potatoes, but I think he shouldn't be allergic to potatoes, and I think I'm going to cure him from his allergy for potatoes. So he walks into the house, I said, look, I made potatoes. but he's going to get sick. Yeah, but I don't want him to get sick. Well, it's not within my decision-making about whether or not he should get sick by eating potatoes. Now, with that being said, there is always the opportunity for tshuva. See, Hashem is always available. Even when a person did a horrible avera, they can actually do such an intense degree of tshuva that, and again, it doesn't say it here, that is as described as intentional sins become mitzvahs. But again, don't go doing that deliberately. Don't go doing that. Yes, if I did it already, it can become a spur. And yes, aren't there stories about people who got so annoyed at themselves and so disappointed that it turned them around and they used to do this terrible thing? Right, but we don't say go rob banks so you'll feel so bad that you'll never cheat somebody. Why not? First of all, well, what if I rob 2 banks? It's a trick of the Yetzer Hara. Second of all, I get so far sunken, I lose any sensitivity. It's like becoming numb. The person becomes numb to the intensity of that avera, etc. Okay. So now, when we are utilizing these items in the service of Hashem, the Ritzoi Noi and His will, again, this is a crucial point that we've talked about so many times. If I want to do something for Hashem, I have to do what Hashem asks. Rabbi Shais Taub says, you serve God your way, I'll serve God His way. If anyone's ever had the experience of someone buying them a present of what they want them to have, I got you a hockey stick for your birthday. I don't want a. You do want a hockey. Yes, you do. You should want a hockey. Look, it's really good. You're going to love it. Really. And then you can imagine how this becomes aggressive and contentious and not pleasant. But I want you to have the hockey stick. I mean it sincerely, but I don't want that. Yes, you do. You don't know what you do, and so on. Well, this is what happens when we decide what Hashem wants. At that moment, that which gives it existence, this opportunity that gives this kosher piece of food or behavior its existence, oila, it becomes elevated, and mizbatel, it becomes subsumed, the nichlal, ba'or ein sof baruch hu, within the infinite light of Hashem, shehu ritzoni yisbarach hamalubush b'hem, which is God's passion that is invested within it. So why did God create apples? So that we can make a bracha and eat the apple, so that we will have the strength to go and do mitzvahs. And when we do that, we have now included the apple in the service of Hashem. Now, in the world of any great manufacturing, or even, I guess, in theater or in the military, we see, let's take the simplistic illustration, we see the actor on the stage presenting to the audience. And that actor is aware that there's 25 different steps till they get to their presentation. If they don't do the presentation, all those 24 steps until then are worthless. That 25th step is what validates all of the effort made until that point. Or maybe manufacturing is a better idea. I come up with a great idea for the newest mousetrap, and I do research and development, and I build a model, and I test it, and I do consumer, and now it's on the shelves in Walmart. I mean, that's an enormous process. But if people don't buy it, the whole thing is worthless. And there are these examples in history of seemingly great ideas that just were total flops. But for every example of something that wasn't purchased at Walmart, there's 100,000 things that never even made it to the shelves in Walmart. So Hashem goes through all of this process to create the world, to present this moment of opportunity. And either I elevate it or I further diminish it. And you think about all of that journey to just be failed, rejected, misses the point. So when we engage in these material items, and again, in this sense, it's specifically, so to speak, not the mitzvahs, meaning it's not like I'm telling you to do it. It's somewhat more voluntary. This is the opportunity to elevate the godliness of Hashem. I have completely removed any sense of distance. Again, back, maybe I'm overplaying the analogy. When I include the kid and he's totally seamlessly included within the group, there's no hester punim, there's no awkwardness. To conceal the godly light. One of the intents when we think about eating matzah. So when we know the objective is that whenever we do a mitzvah, we should be thinking about what is the message of this mitzvah. We sit in the sukkah because we want to know that God protected us. And if we don't know that, we're missing out at least on some part of the mitzvah and perhaps on the entire purpose of the mitzvah. On Pesach in particular, when we eat the matzah, we're supposed to be thinking about this is what it means to go out of Mitzrayim. We're supposed to be thinking about really being focused. And one of the other directives is, imagine if we always ate like we ate matzah. And we use eating because, again, animals eat, everybody eats, and so on. So why do I eat matzah? Purely because it's a mitzvah. And sometimes it's a bit laborious, chomping on the, eat the matzah, lean to the left. It's not always so pleasant. But imagine if every time we ate, we had that kind of godly awareness. We were thinking about the opportunity to be connected with the infinity of Hashem. When I'm eating matzah, there's no uncertainty about the purpose of this behavior. Why am I eating the matzah? Because it is the will of Hashem. That's the only reason why I should be eating matzah. I see the matzah not as, I'll say this, not as food. Of course, it is food, and sometimes we even eat matzah otherwise. But I see it purely as a mitzvah. I think in our society, my personal guess, like lulav and esrog, because, of course, I know that there are esrogs used for esrog jelly and esrog liquor and so on, but I'm sure there's hundreds of species of other fruits and things that I never heard of. The only reason why the concept of lulav and esrog exists in my life is for the mitzvah of lulav and esrog. Yes, I don't live on a farm, and I don't know about the different ingredients in citrus, etc., or live where there's palm trees and seeing lulavs all over the place. But if not for the mitzvah of lulav and esrog, it would be like some rare species of animal that only lives in sub-Saharan Africa. I may be able to look it up in the dictionary, but it would have no meaning in my life. So when I see lulav and esrog, I really only see it as the godliness. Because why else would it be in my life if not for the fact that it's a mitzvah? Otherwise, it's like some foreign language that I may factually know exists, but it has no relationship with me. Well, imagine if we could see all of the material world that way. We could see it only as an opportunity to bring godliness into the sort of out of the shadows type of thing. Evoke, pull up at the table and sit with us. If I could have that kind of awareness, the world would be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. There would be no hester punim, no concealment in the physical item. And the koyach nefesh achienis abaham shevi agufa adam hamakayim hamitzvah hu mislabish gam kein be'asiyah zoy ba'olam haklipa v'nichla b'kedushas hamitzvah shiritzani yisparach hu bato borin seif baruch hu. Then not only does the physical item like the matzah cease to be thought of as flour and water and nourishment and gluten and non-gluten and calories and so on, we see it only as the mitzvah, like I see the lulav and esrog only as a mitzvah, and otherwise, as far as I know, it doesn't exist. This also is what happens to me and my physical body that is engaged in the processes of shaking the lulav and esrog and digesting the matzah and walking to the mitzvah. Why would you do that? Only for the service of Hashem. Why else are you banging the mezuzah into your door frame? So that means the hammer, my body, my physicality, my physical strength is only in existence in its service of Hashem. I have completely spiritualized it. As otherwise, I wouldn't do it. There is a story, it's probably apocryphal, but it illustrates the point. It's half joking. They speaking to whoever the FBI was who was investigating all about illegal liquor during Prohibition. And they said to him, if they repeal Prohibition, what are you going to do? He says, I'll have a drink. Meaning, I'm not opposed to liquor. That's the law, so I enforce it. It's not the law. I don't do it anymore. I mean, imagine, again, whether it's a true story or not a true story, it illustrates this idea. the value, why do I shake lulav and esrog in October and not in July? Only because it's a mitzvah. So that means my physical body, while it is engaged in this behavior, is only for the mitzvah. It has no other character to it. It's a total revelation of godliness. It is completely subsumed and consumed with its godly character. All right, we'll stop here.